Retelling our stories of God. It's one of the great paradoxes of spiritual search that the more we try to define God, the further we are away from the truth of it. The more we listen to what other people say, the further we are away from our own experience. Because the experience of God or godliness isn't a fixed thing. It's not something that can just happen and be done. It's a continually moving experience of life. Like you can't just understand life and be done because you're still living. It's this movement. So God is an undefinable thing that we continuously try to define. I'll start with one silly little story of me as a kid. You know, we were all quite precocious when we were kids, right? But so I was in Catholic school, and the nuns must have been fourth grade or something because we were getting real advanced in our studies, right? So the nuns tell us that God is infinite and that you can never understand infinite because there's always more. Infinite is no matter what number you get to, you can always add another number onto it and keep going, right? Well, I was a precocious little kid and I'm like, well, don't tell me I can't do that. I'll show you. And so as I went to sleep at night, every night I decided I'm going to find infinity. And so I started, and I started out counting. And of course, I quickly realized I wasn't going to get anywhere that way. So then I just kind of started quickly just going through numbers, trying to get way, 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 way out into infinity. And of course, I couldn't do it, right? So then I decided, well, heck. The problem was that I was always starting back at zero and going out. I said, at the very least, I should give myself a break. And wherever I got to the night before is where I get to start at the next night. So now I'm really clicking along, right? I'm going, yeah, out to infinity, out to infinity, out to infinity. Fall asleep. Next night it's like, okay, start there and keep going out to infinity, out to infinity, out to infinity. And of course, I still wasn't making it right. It's kind of making me a little, annoyed. So then all of a sudden one day I decided, well, if I can start where I left off the night before, why can't I just start at the end? Boom. I was there, right? Boom. Here we are. We're all there in infinity. But the thing about infinity is now instead of being behind it and trying to get myself to it, now I was in front of it and I had to just keep going. But I was always in infinity. I didn't tell the nuns. I didn't think they'd understand that. But isn't that very much like God? The more we try to define it, the further away we are from this. Which is why so many religions end up just saying, hey, it's a guy sitting up on the cloud and he looks like this, and they'll even paint a picture of it and show us, right? Because then we can just relax and go, okay, I'm following that God. I mean, that's happened through history and history and history, right? With all the pagan gods, they all had a statue. They all looked like something so that they could get defined. There it is. There's God. There's the goddesses. And then you'd know, and then you had something that you can pray to. And then we have all of our saints and avatars, Jesus and Buddha, and we can imagine that these people have gotten to God, or have experienced God. And so then we put them up on a pedestal and we honor them because that gives us something solid to work with. It's uncomfortable to just be in that infinity, constantly moving along, never able to stop even enough to define anything. But that is infinity. That is God. So if we really want to experience God in the here and now, the easiest thing to do is just simply listen. So I'm here in my room and there's all sorts of noises going on everywhere. So when you listen, you have this huge 360-degree ball all around you of things coming into your ears. Now, in non-duality teachings, what you want to do is you want to locate who is listening. And so when you're doing that, you are in a state where you're relaxed from the constant defining of things. And then we can kind of get a sense of that being inside of godliness, being inside of nature, being the human being that is here living this life. And from that point, now we can start looking at all the different stories of God and going, well, what's useful there and what's kind of silly about it? Like take the story of Buddha, for instance. That's the story of there was this guy and he was a prince and then he went out into the woods and he meditated and he ate only 1 grain of rice and then he sat down under a tree and became enlightened. Well, you kind of just really put that story in context and there are a whole lot of strange things about it. Buddhism grew up from that. And notice that Buddhism is all about guys, right? Women aren't really allowed, and we kind of just don't notice that because we're just projecting out onto this vision of enlightened Buddha. Buddha was a prince. So it's like, so what? Enlightenment is for rich people? Because princes are rich people. They are not the regular old schmuck you and me, right? So now we've taken this idea and we've taken enlightenment itself and we've turned it into something for the select few. We've taken a big idea and we've condensed it down into a icon, right? And so now people are like, oh, what did Buddha say? What did Buddha say? And then we try to translate old texts from really long ago that we have no hope of understanding, which causes us to project it further and further out and cause these ideas to fixate more and more. What if enlightenment was something very simple that all of us could do? That would be a totally different story than this story of Buddhism that we have, right? Let's take the story of Jesus. In Christianity, Jesus was actually the Son of God. He's not just a regular guy. He's the Son of God. And few little books got left about him and a giant religion got started. Now, there's some people out there, some historians who are saying, there's actually no evidence that Jesus lived at all. And Jesus was 800 years past the time of Buddha. People were writing, there was books, histories were being written, but there's literally nothing about Jesus that can be confirmed. We can confirm Buddha. So now all these historians are saying, if you put the evidence together without being fixated on the story that we were told, then it really starts to look like Jesus never existed and Christianity was invented by the Romans to help control the populations that they conquered. We don't know, right? Neither of those things can really be proven. And I'm not saying to believe this story instead of the other story. I'm just saying take your mind and let it float on these different possibilities. What if the stories that were told from God are the things that are keeping us from the experience of God? Now, if we were going to step back and take a broad overview snapshot of Islam, that's can turn into a very, very different story too. I mean, the basic story is that Muhammad came, he had this experience speaking to God, and he won a whole bunch of battles and all sorts of things happened, and then Islam grew from that. So what if we just kind of step back from that story a little bit and look at it and go, yeah, Muhammad, we have tons of evidence that he existed. Lots of people wrote down what he said. So we can very easily say, oh, look, it seems really, really obvious that Muhammad had this experience of God. But then what happened the second he died? I mean, people just immediately started fighting. And this is why the whole Muslim world is split today. Stand back and look at that and go, okay, Muhammad had an amazing experience that he was able to share with the people around him, alive around him at that time, but it didn't seem to translate well into future experiences for others. Again, kind of like the Buddha story. We ended up with all sorts of priests, and sheikhs, and, all these spiritual leaders, but how many of them are really in that same experience that Muhammad had? So now I'm not saying to stop believing, Islam, to drop your faith, but stop and go, wait a minute, at least say something is missing in that story, so you shouldn't fixate onto the story. Let the story be a story. How do these stories help us? Well, the Buddha story helps us by saying enlightenment is possible. So let's take that to enlightenment is possible for everyone. Let's take that closer. Enlightenment is possible for you, right? The Jesus story. God sent his only begotten Son down to earth to redeem us of our sins. That's us. That means we have more responsibility than anybody else has ever had, so let's take that on. That's a good thing. Muhammad's story was one of uniting all the tribes that were in that area. They were all worshiping all sorts of different gods. So he was saying God is one, but what he was actually saying is that there is no God but God. Take your idea of God and throw that away, la ilaha. But there is something, and we can experience it. And he was showing us that we can experience this. So see how you can take stories and you can move them in ways within your being that brings you closer to an experience of God. If we take any of these stories and turn it into a fixed gospel, dogma, then we're moving ourselves away. And one of the ways we can really tell is how much of our own personal power do we give away to others who say they understand the story. if we stop giving away our power, our personal ability to see and know this godliness, then everything changes. And again, just listen. Now, at this point, I've been messing with the stories in your head, right? So just stop and just listen to the sound of these stories in your head. Now, maybe I really upset you and made you mad. If that's the case, then you're like, I can prove, da 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 da, right? Or maybe I just kind of messed with the stories a little bit in a light way so that you can kind of just relax into what is your most important story about God. How can you look at it in a different way? What happens if you take your story of God and stop using it as a projection and bring it into yourself? Does that make a big difference? It just might. So we can retell our stories, and we really dramatically retell who we think we are. And if we retell who we think we are, then we retell the way that we're relating with all of existence, with life itself. So this is a good way to kind of just play around with ourselves, see where we get.